Okay, let's get it started. Okay, welcome everybody. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you are remote, please update your remote name so that we have your first and last name. That's just how we know that you made it. Same thing for everybody here. If you haven't already, please grab a name tent so that we know who you are, and then just leave it there at the front when you leave. That way we can track attendance, and we'll have it for you again next week. And with that, we're going to get started. So welcome again, everyone, to Foreign National Tax Consulting for both tax residents and non-residents. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our agenda. So tonight is our first night of training. We're going to do kickoff, talk about some basic IRS requirements, clinic overview, and then go into non-resident aliens. As you hopefully remember from our email, everybody is going to do non-resident taxes. You have the option if you would like to also do resident taxes. So we'll do non-resident, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at it with resident taxes. So that's kind of the plan for what we're going to do there. All right, we're going to do that. Okay, we're going to do training this week. We're going to do training next week. We're going to do training the week after. We're going to take a week off because it's going to be Thanksgiving. And then we're going to come back on December 2nd, and we're going to do the non-resident test from the IRS. That is the plan. It is not required that you do it with us, but it can be very helpful to do it with the group, just because we can talk about any bad questions and help point you to reference material. If you are doing the resident exam, you can do that with us on December 3rd. That one will be a remote only one. We won't be here on campus, but otherwise we'll be here in this same room at the U of M every day. Otherwise we'll be live on Zoom for everybody else that is not. All right, moving on. So agenda for tonight, we're going to start with the volunteer orientation, talk about some existential questions. You didn't think you get philosophy when you came to tax training. Talk about volunteer requirements, talk about some resources, talk about tax certification training, our Moodle course, and then we'll move on to a break and go into non-resident taxes. So our first question, and I don't even know how to get rid of these stupid things, but we'll just give up on it. Why are we here? Why are we here? Why are we here? It's a very fundamental question. At least why we are here today, if nothing else, I can say, is we're here to help people. In particular, our goal is to focus on helping international students, scholars, teachers, and researchers prepare their taxes. As we think about this, well, why this group of people? Why this particular type of help? In general, right, this group of people, everybody has to file some sort of a tax form. Most of these folks don't receive a lot of help to do this from their sponsoring organizations, right? All of those F&J visa holders had somebody bring them here to the United States, but those organizations don't necessarily help them with that. These individuals are from other countries, so right, the tax rules are very different. So they don't know what to do. And there are not a lot of other good options, right? Most free tax sites won't help them. There is some software out there, but it's not really cheap. And then paid tax preparers who know what they're doing, they are most definitely not cheap. So in terms of why this is so important, right? If we think about what happens if you file some wrong returns or if you don't file them at all, right? Just like anybody else, the possible tax consequences could be things like you don't get your money back. About 85% of our clients get federal refunds. And if they don't file, they never get that money. So that is just like waiting for them to call and get. You can also, if you are one of the 15% that doesn't get such good news with us, right? If you owe money, you're going to also owe some penalties and interest, right? And like if things go really, really, really badly, right? You could be in a lot of trouble. Yes, you could face some felony criminal charges, right? It takes some very egregious behavior to do that, but occasionally that does happen. That's going to happen to everybody, right? No matter whether you're a citizen, a resident, or an international student. However, there can also be some really significant immigration consequences for incorrect or late filing, right? It can include denials of future applications, so new visas, new residency, permanent residency, or citizenship. It also can include other actions by the administration, right? They are taking a very different approach to enforcement and interpretation of federal laws. And so that really opens up that population for, potential issues. So preparing a correct and complete tax return is very important. So we are going to train and practice a lot to make sure that you are knowledgeable and that we can provide accurate and knowledgeable support to all of our clients, right? So that is my goal. So when we go through all of this stuff, what we're really trying to do is make sure that when you talk to a student, you're able to give them good information and good advice. All right. Our partners that we work with, we also have some standards for how we interact with other people. So we'll talk about those for a little bit. So the IRS wants to make sure that your civil rights are protected, right? No discrimination based on protected categories, such as national origin. The Minnesota Department of Revenue is one of our other important partners, right? And this is their list of things that we cannot discriminate against, which actually does not include national origin, but it does include a bunch of other things here. So we want to make sure that everybody that we help is welcome, right? What we're really focused on, do you need to file taxes? We're here to help you. That's really what we're about. So in terms of who are we, we're a national coalition of organizations that work together to provide free taxes. So I'm the executive director of North. We're a nonprofit. We partner with schools and student organizations and our VITA. These are our leadership team members over here. You are all U of M Twin Cities members. We have on the Zoom call people from potentially Lehigh University, App State, Bard College, Goucher College, Washington State University, and Mankato State University, and a couple more that I'm sorry I'm forgetting. So we have people from all around the United States that are signed up to help students do their taxes. So, and we all work together kind of towards those same goals. If we think about what's in it for us, right? It's totally fine that we get something out of it. We all get to learn about taxes, right? That can help ourselves when we do our own taxes. We don't have to pay somebody. We can save ourselves some money when we know how the tax law works, right? This is a really great resume building experience. You learn a bunch of technical knowledge. You learn a lot of communication skills working with our students, which is fantastic. That's what it's for. Some schools have a volunteer hours requirement for a degree or a particular program. This can meet that requirement as well. And then just the altruistic, hey, I just want to help some folks with something in their life that is difficult and challenging. All right, I'm gonna sort of skip on this. Basically, to just say, where do we come from? We've been here at the U of M since 2010. We've been growing ever since. We're one of the largest, if not the largest, non-resident filer in the IRS VITA program. We helped just under 5,000 people file returns last year. So 4,800 and change people filed with us, hoping to help lots more again this coming year. All right. So as we look at our plans going forward, right, we want to try to continue to expand the support we provide to our partner schools and organizations. We want to add additional states, so we want to help people. Not only are they schools in different states, but often students will have an internship at another state, and so they need to file state tax return in multiple states. So we want to be able to support them with that. We also do work on the IT side to provide our tools that we use for them to be improved. And we're also doing a new mobile traditional site. This gives us some alternatives for our volunteer readiness check that we do, as well as helping out with amended and prior year returns. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get further along. All right, so how are we going to get there? What is the process that we're going to do all of this great stuff? Well, the process is through the IRS VITA program, which stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. So it's a program that the IRS puts on that provides free basic tax return preparation to qualified individuals. Generally, this is low to moderate income individuals, also limited English-speaking individuals. And generally, the income limit is $67,000, although we sometimes will have a slightly different number that we use. The advantage is that this program provides specialized training, a defined process for doing returns. We have support from the IRS and the Minnesota Department of Revenue. If we ever have questions or we need something, we go to them. And then we also get volunteer liability protection, right? So I'll get to that in just a sec. The one catch to all of that fabulous goodness, some things that you have to do as a volunteer. You have to pass the test that we're going to take for volunteer tax law and agree to abide by the processes. Otherwise, that volunteer protection is not there in place. And that also risks not providing good support and service to all of our clients, where we know it's going to be really important to them to make sure everything is done correctly. All right. We have 2 tax law certification paths. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? You can do non-residents only. If you do that, you're going to have 3 IRS tests that you have to pass: standards of conduct, intake interview, and quality review, and then the foreign student. If you want to do the advanced resident and non-resident taxes, you're going to add 1 more test in there, which is the advanced resident test. The good news: these tests are open book. They are open note. They are open computer. They are no time limit. They are not open friend, and I would not recommend ChatGPT as well, because ChatGPT does not always tell the truth. The passing grade for these is 80%. The one little bad thing is you only get 2 chances to pass. So, but you get everything open and you get to see all of your answers at the end and figure out which questions you did wrong, and you get to take it again. So usually, if you follow us through on the process, you're going to do just fine with all of these tests. All right, we have an IRS, in addition to the IRS test, we also have an online Moodle course. And as you volunteer for additional years, basically some of those pieces drop off. So we do fall training materials. Everybody always has to do the IRS tests. We do spring training materials, and then we do a volunteer readiness check. And typically at the end of that check, we have, you either do several scenarios where we say, okay, here's a practice client, prepare their return for us. Make sure that you can do it correctly. We also now have the option with our new our mobile site that we can do a couple of clinics where you will help people using the traditional model rather than using the practice scenarios. So this is going to be a pilot here at the U of M Twin Cities for this year. We'll see how it goes. Either option is just fine for you. We'll talk about that more. You don't have to decide now. But when we get to that, we'll say, okay, you can choose which way you want to approach that volunteer readiness check, and we'll go from there. We also have quality reviewer and site coordinator roles. So again, as you get more experience, those are things that you can look at stepping into as well. All right, so the volunteer agreement. So this is a form that's automatically generated from the IRS testing system, which is called Link and Learn, and it includes a summary of your test results. So when you take the test, it'll say you passed. It doesn't care what the number is, as long as it's like 80.01%, that's passed, you're completely good. From that, we need to match a government issued ID against your volunteer information on that volunteer agreement. The reason why, right, unfortunately, there are quite a few rules in the IRS that are based on people being naughty. And the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, VITA program, there have been some people that see that as a way to go there and I will pretend to volunteer and I will steal all these people's identity and their social security numbers and I will file fraudulent returns and get lots of money back. And so to help prevent anything like that from happening, the IRS instituted this test. It just needs to be a government ID. It can be driver's license, passport. It doesn't have to be a US passport. Just making sure you're a real person and that you're not on the naughty list, essentially. So, but when you create that account, you should know that you need to use a name that matches whatever your government issued ID is. So no nicknames, please. And you're going to sign and send that to us electronically when we're done. All right. As we think about your role as a volunteer, right? What I'm going to say, first off, right? You are not expected to be an expert, right? This is a learning process. However, you are expected to be good at finding information, and you are expected to ask for help if you don't know, right? What we really want to do is we want to make sure that somebody walks out with a correct tax return. And if you are not sure, it is completely fine to say, hey, I'm not quite sure about this. I'm going to go talk to this other volunteer, my site coordinator, this other experienced person to make sure that we get it right. If we don't know, we're going to say, hey, that's a great question. We're going to go talk to the IRS. We're going to make sure that we give you the right answer because we know how important it is to make sure that that tax return is done correctly. Now, you are going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. You are going to make them. Our goal is to have as many of those mistakes get made during training so that when you're actually face-to-face with a client, you're not going to make many of them then. Again, if you're not sure, please just ask. We are what's called a facilitated self-assistance site, which is like a really fancy IRS way of saying DIY plus help. So at those sites, You are not going to be the one preparing the return. Our clients are going to be the ones that are taking their income documents and entering it all into the tax software. You are not going to sign any returns with your name. You are not a paid preparer. But what you do need to do is make sure you keep taxpayer information confidential. Be courteous, right? Some people come in and they have a really great day, right? They get a lot of money back. It's fantastic. Some of those people, that 15%, right? They walk in, they get some bad news. They have a big number that they have to figure out how to pay and they don't really know what to do, right? And so sometimes they can get a little bit upset. Sometimes they don't really know how to handle that. So be courteous, be polite. If you need assistance, if somebody does start to get upset, that's what your site coordinators are there for. They wear a red shirt like what I'm wearing today. They will always be there to take your back and make sure that you're in good shape. And don't let the clients interpret the rules, right? We all wish that sometimes like, wait, that doesn't have to be that way. Well, all we can say is you will have spent a great deal of time learning what the tax law is. And, you're going to be able to interpret the rules correctly for them. All right. So for all of our modules, for all of the stuff we do, reference information is your friend, right? We do not expect you to memorize this stuff, right? It's too much to memorize, especially in the time that we have. If you're going for the CPA exam, you will need to at some point know it all by heart, but for now, you do not need to have everything memorized. But what you do need to do is learn to find what you're going to need, all right? Again, ask for help, right? I'm not going to answer a question in the test, but I don't want to just give you the answer, right? I want to help you see where to find that answer so that next time you can find that yourself. And then the time after that, maybe you'll even remember and you don't have to look it up. We want you to be successful, right? I really want you to be successful. I will do all I can to help you get there. But there is a lot of material to cover. There's a lot to learn, right? And so I'm going to do everything that I can. But my goal ultimately, as much as I want you to be a tax volunteer, I want to help people do correct returns. And so that's the goal that we're headed for all of us. All right, these are some of the resources. We'll talk about them in a little bit more detail, but basically there'll be links to all of these out on the website, and we'll have some of them we access. So let's talk about the IRS. 2025 is going to be a fabulous year for us. All right, so the federal administration has made some significant reductions in the IRS workforce starting kind of earlier this summer, like I think 30 to 40% kind of numbers. So there are a lot fewer people there to do the work. And there's also a big loss of expertise to do the work correctly. There was a tax law passed, the one big beautiful bill, I'll call it the OB3, that passed on July 4th. There were some very significant tax law changes that were included in that. We're going to talk about those in the tax training, but there were some very significant changes. Plus, we have a current federal government shutdown for the past 30 plus days, right, where most of the people at the IRS are not working. There are a few that are still working, but a lot of them are not. So what does that mean for us, right? So for our taxpayers, right, this means that support is very limited, right? There's basically no phone support. There's only automated return processing. So if you e-file and everything is perfect, you might get your refund if you're getting it directly deposited. Anything else, and it's going to sit there in the pile until people are back. The VITA program material, so the reference materials that we use in our program for training and for support in our tax clinics, those were all produced generally early this summer based on pre-OB3 law. And many of the publications have not been updated and won't get updated until hopefully most of them will get updated at the mid-January timeframe. So our kind of main reference materials have law that is not actually, or instructions that are not actually correct, right? So that is going to be a challenge for all of us as we try to navigate this. For better or worse, the IRS tests are going to basically match the training materials. So if you do that for a real client, it will be wrong. But if you answer it based on the training materials for the test, you will be right. So we are working on some cheat sheets, I guess, is the best way to call it, of like, this is what it should be, and then this is what the test says and the training materials say for all of these different things, so that you kind of can try to keep track of those, because it is a mess, right? This year is kind of a mess. I also kind of expect delays to the IRS systems, right? Because right now is like, normally they're really frantic. All right, let's get all the forms done. Let's get the software done. And nobody's around doing that kind of stuff. So forms and instructions probably will be delayed. Link and Learn, our training, like testing system, that usually comes out in mid-November. So hypothetically, like next week, I would be saying it's here, create your accounts. Probably, I don't know. We'll just be waiting until it comes out. And then the start of the filing season. Typically, that's the last Monday in January. I know they will do everything they can to still meet that start of the filing season, but that also potentially might delay things a little bit. So this year is a little bit of an unusual year. Hopefully it's not a trend, just a one-time off, where we have resources that are not as good as we would like. All right, so we're going to do our best to develop alternative resources. This is, again, a question where you're like, oh, hey, I have this thing here, this question, and it's asking about this. Like, remember, which one is it that I'm supposed to use? You can say, oh, yes, well, we're using this. So this is where you can find that reference information for the number that you need for a tax return or for the IRS tests. All right. Please be patient. Please be aware, right? That's the biggest thing, is that know that there are going to be issues. Okay. By any chance, is anybody a CPA already or an enrolled agent? If you are, you can get continuing education credits for your volunteering work. So if you are not, but you become one in the future, know that volunteering for a VITA program will let you do that. You have to certify on the advanced resident test. So if you wanted to do that, that is a requirement. And there's an extra section on the form that we could help you fill out if that applies. For everybody online, if that applies to you, just shoot me an email to that volunteer@nrtaxhelp.org, and we'll make sure we get the right information for you. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction, right? So we're here to help people. We want to do it right. We're doing it with a hand tied behind our back because our documents are maybe not as good as they should be, but we're going to give it our best shot. So let's talk about our first test that we're going to take, standards of conduct. This is a ethical test to make sure that you follow and understand expected behavior. It's a 10-question true false multiple choice test. All right, so it's not a huge test by any means. There is this link here, this publication 4961 is the updated version of that. That is correct. And it does have like a bunch of good information that you can have open while you're taking the test, which is fabulous. All right. Basically, again, the mission is to help people do their taxes, to establish the public trust, right? Volunteers are required to maintain a high standard of ethical conduct and provide quality service. So everybody has to pass the test every year. This is my 19th year. I have to pass the test just like all of you do as well. We also must certify in our tax law. We have to sign on the form that we will follow all of the forms and processes, right? And then once you sign, I get to verify your identity, and I sign as well that I've double checked everything. So we're all going to be good there. So as a volunteer in the VITA program, you must follow what are called quality site requirements. So these are kind of 10 guidelines of things that must happen at the tax clinics. I'll talk about those in a minute. Number 2, you cannot accept payment, ask for donations, or accept refund payments for federal or state returns that are done by customers, right? So we do not ask for money. We do not ask for cookies. We give you cookies as a volunteer, or we give you pizza as a volunteer if we can, but we don't ask for anything from our clients except, you can say thank you. That would be lovely. Do not solicit business from taxpayers that you help or use the information that you gain from them for any direct or indirect personal benefit for yourself or any other specific organization or individual, right? So basically you can't say, oh, Elizabeth, yes, you were complaining to me about how your car broke down and you were asking about credits. My cousin has this repair shop. He could totally hook you up. That is completely against the volunteer standards of conduct, right? We can't make money off our clients. We can't let anybody else help anybody else make money off our clients as well. Do not knowingly prepare false returns, right? We can't help it if our clients lie to us. They very rarely lie to us, but if they did, we can't stop them, right? But we can't know that that information is incorrect and prepare the return. Do not engage, and this is lovely, right? In criminal, infamous, dishonest, notoriously disgraceful conduct, or any other conduct that could have a negative effect on the VITA TCE program, right? Be a good person. That's all I'm going to say to that one, right? And then treat all taxpayers in a professional, courteous, and respectful manner. Like I said, right, they're coming in. It's a very high stress situation for them. They're often very worried about it. They don't know anything. They're really anxious that they're going to do it wrong, right? And that something very bad is going to happen because of that. So be courteous, be professional, be respectful, be patient with them because they're having a day when they come to see us. All right, let's talk about quality site requirements. So these are things that all of the sites have to do. Certification. So there are different levels of certification for different types of tax law. So if you do a return or you help a client with a return, you have to be certified, pass those IRS tests based on the tax law that you're helping. There are intake, interview, and quality review processes that have to be followed, right? We have to make sure that the person that we're helping really is who they say they are, right? So we check an ID to make sure of that. We make sure that if we are reviewing a return, we check the important things, right? Is their name right? Their social security, their date of birth? Are their income documents entered properly? All that kind of good stuff. We confirm photo identification and taxpayer identification numbers, right? Again, we don't want anybody filing a fraudulent return. We have our reference materials available, right? We are not doing this just strictly from memory. We've got stuff here with us as we need it to look up information to help our clients. Everybody signs volunteer agreements. You can't volunteer without it. We have to make sure that we file timely. So if we're helping somebody file a return, right, that return is generally due April 15th. We can't just say, oh yeah, just file it whenever you get the chance. Or if we're doing actual returns in the traditional model, we can't just like hang on to them for a few weeks and then like file them all at once. We need to send them all in. Civil rights, we cannot discriminate against our clients. We have to identify our site. So the IRS, bless their hearts, they track us. They say, oh, Maria, you and those folks here at the U of M, here is your tax ID number for your site. And so we can see how many returns did you file and how many returns were done correctly. And so they can come back to us and say, something's not right here. Like there's a bunch of issues with education credits or something like that. If we had a problem, they would give us that feedback. Then we could improve our training for next year to make sure we fix that. That electronic filing number is this similar thing within the tax software. And then security, privacy, and confidentiality, right? We're going to get a very vivid peek into a lot of people's worlds, right? We're going to see where they worked. We're going to see how much money they earned, how much money they paid in rent, right? We're going to know a lot of information about them. So we want to make sure that we keep that information private and confidential. We're not going to talk about it. We're going to obscure that information and not, shout it across the hall. Hey, Chair, can you help this person? They got divorced and I don't know what to do, right? That is not what we need to yell out across the room to let everybody know, right? That is not the opposite of private and confidential. So make sure we keep our information, their information there. All right. Terrible things can happen if you don't do that, right? You would have to leave. You would not be able to volunteer. You would be on the naughty list. If it goes really badly, right? If we were supporting you and did not follow the processes, right? Our program could be disbanded and then we would not be able to help anybody do taxes. So it can go really wrong. It very, very rarely happens, right? But there have been, a handful of people in all of the IRS that did some naughty stuff. And so we take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. All right. If something bad happens, you're volunteering, tell your site coordinator. There's also an email address that you can report it to the government. They will take it very seriously and they will investigate it. I tell you that. Basically, yeah, that's basically what it is. So what do you do if you have somebody that you don't think is telling the truth, right? If you're not sure about it, ask some more questions, right? There's a lot of very confusing terminology in taxes. We haven't even hit it and you're probably already confused. So make sure you talk with them a little bit more, try to probe, figure out, do we just use a different word? Or, are they truly being inconsistent and kind of changing their story based on whatever you're saying? Figure out, is this information unusual, right? If you are a college student, would it be common for you to say, make $20,000 of charitable contributions? Probably, right? Most college students don't have $20,000 of extra money just kind of sitting around to donate, but maybe, right? It would just kind of depend. This is where we would want to ask some additional questions, right? If you have concerns, talk to your site coordinator. They're a great person. We can also come in and kind of have a discussion with the volunteer, the client as well. And ultimately, though, if you're not happy, if you're not comfortable with the information, right, you don't need to prepare that return. You can just say, I'm not comfortable with this information that you provided. You don't have any supporting documentation. We can't help you with this part of it, right? If you want to go and do your part of it, you can do that, but I can't help you with that part of it. So you can also remind our taxpayers, and we should all know, right, is when they sign a tax return, they're signing under penalties of perjury that everything is true, correct, and complete, right? So I'm signed up for the Minnesota Department of Revenue, like news releases, and like 2 or 3 times a year, they'll announce, oh, we've charged so-and-so with, 5 counts of filing false tax returns. Each penalty is, subject to 10 years in prison and whatever money in jail. So it can be a very serious thing. Very rare, not common, right? I don't expect that you guys would see any of that, but you just need to know that it's a possibility and what to do if it were to happen. All right, let's talk about Volunteer Protection Act, right? This is a big one because as a volunteer, you're not getting paid, you're not receiving compensation, you're not getting $500 in cash or in other things of value. And as long as you're following the procedures and following the training and staying within scope, you are protected from liability and consequences of unknowingly performing a negligent act. Right. So if somebody comes to you and they say, yep, I did this and I had $100 of charitable contributions, you say, yeah, that seems reasonable. I'll take their word for it. And you help them and they file their return. And it turns out that $100 wasn't true. You're not going to be liable because you don't know, right? You took their word for it. It seemed reasonable. You asked the appropriate questions. It was in scope. You were trained for it. You followed all of our processes. So the IRS is going to come back after them to say, hey, you got to pay back that money, but you're not going to be in trouble for doing that. The areas where you could get in trouble are helping on things that we do not train you on, right? So we're not going to train on something like cryptocurrency, right? We do not train on NFTs or anything like that. That is outside of the scope for the IRS program. So we draw a line there and say, nope, we're not going to do it. So if you help people with that, that is falling outside of the scope, and now you're opening yourself up to liability. You're no longer protected because you're not following our processes. That's one of the biggest ones. All right. And that's the end of the standards of conduct, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal money, don't try to take money from the clients, don't make money off of them. Any questions on that? All right. Okay. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. All right, let's talk about intake, interview, and quality review. All right, so intake and interview, right? This is the clients coming into the tax clinics. Quality review is at the end, right? We've prepared a return. Now we need to check the return. We quality review it. All right, so there are 2 online training materials that I'm going to have and recommend that everybody use, right? The links are here. It'll be out on the Moodle as well. There's a training presentation, this Pub 5101. Then there's Pub 5838, which is a handbook, kind of a step-by-step guide, right? The challenge for that is that these processes and this training, they are based on resident site forms, not non-resident forms. And it is also based on a traditional site process rather than the FSA process. So that traditional process kind of looks like this. A client makes an appointment and they come in, they bring all of their stuff. They fill out this intake form, this 13614. It can be a -C for residents or a -NR for non-residents. It's got all kinds of information, name and address and birth date and all the different types of income they might have, and you have kids and all of these other credits. Through the traditional process, right, that form 13614C must always be completely filled out. So if the client doesn't know, we have to go back through it and make sure every question is answered. Anything that they aren't sure of, we always make sure that it's yes or a no. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, you have a W-2, how many W-2s, put the number in, that kind of thing. So that always has to be done under the traditional process. The tax volunteer would review that intake form, make sure it's all good, talk to the client, say, oh, I see that you worked 5 jobs this year. You've been pretty busy, aren't you? Yeah, I worked here and then they let me go and then I had a couple jobs and then finally this fall, I found a new permanent job. Just to make sure, right, that if they had 5, maybe they had 6, maybe they had 7, maybe it was really only 4. So you want to make sure you do a thorough interview, clarifying questions, try to resolve any conflicting information. At that point, right, you have this form that has all of this reference information, you have all of their documents. You could go into the software, prepare those forms for them, right? Then a quality reviewer would come over, they would look through all of those forms, they would talk with the client, and they would make sure that everything was correct. If it's all good, the client would sign the e-file authorization and consent forms, and then we would file the return. So that's kind of the traditional process. And that's really what the intake interview and quality review test is about. If you choose to do the volunteer readiness check where we do working the tax clinics instead of doing the scenarios in Moodle, then you will follow this process. And we'll do a little bit of extra kind of refresher training in February to make sure you're up to speed and feeling comfortable with this. All right, for everyone else, what we follow is that facilitated self-assistance process, right? The client requests access to the software, they get the links, they go into the software and they create an account, they enter all of their information, they file their tax return, and then they ask us for help wherever they need it, right? They might come here and then be working on their return, and we're here the whole time to answer questions. They might just send us an email if they have one question while they're going through it. They might sign up for an office hours appointment and say, yeah, can you just check it out before I file it? It's really a DIY plus help, right? They're doing the work. We are here to support them. Now, we still follow a lot of the same procedures, right? We're going to confirm their identity with a photo ID when they check in for appointments, right? We're going to make sure that we're certified to help them. We're going to do a lot of training about that because there's nothing in the software at that point that's going to stop you from helping somebody in an area that you're not trained on. So you need to know what those lines are so that you can kind of stay coloring within them. We're always going to encourage them to do a quality review, right? But we can't make them do it, right? It's their software, they're online, they're doing it, right? I can't get in there and click a button to not let them do it. They're going to do it, but we're going to help them. We're going to do what we can to help make sure that the returns that they file are going to be accurate and correct. All right. Now I said that if we think they're lying, we don't have to do the return. But if we think they're telling the truth, then we can rely on what they say, right? We're gonna believe them if we believe them, right? We'll take their word for it. But we may ask additional questions to make sure if they're being inconsistent so that we can understand where that inconsistency is coming from. So as an example, right? So if somebody says, again, oh, I gave $100 to charity. Do I need to see a receipt? Not necessarily, right? Oh, I gave $20,000 to charity. Yes, I think that I would need to see some sort of documentation. You would need it for the IRS anyway, but we would definitely want to see some sort of documentation because that is very unusual for our typical clients. Again, remember, if you're not comfortable with that information, you're not obligated to prepare the return. Get your site coordinator involved. They will be there to support you. And that is the end of the intake, interview, and quality review test or training. Again, 10 questions, true, false, multiple choice, 80% to pass, 2 tries. Have those publications open when you take the test. It is totally fine to do like a PDF terminology search. Don't do ChatGPT, do the original IRS publications. Any questions on those? All right. Okay, I know it's a lot of information. We've got one more big section. We're going to start our training for the foreign student test. I think this is probably like 30 minutes or so. So we're going to go a bit longer, but not too much longer. All right. So here we go. Let's start with the fun, right? So taxes are like 100 years of social engineering through the law, right? Both the federal government and the state governments do it. They pass laws that say how much money should people pay in taxes, right? And over time, different governments have had different rules put in place to try to encourage different behavior, right? Get married, have some kids, we'll give you some money off your taxes. Oh, we love kids, we'll give you extra money off your taxes. Buy a house, buy a car that's been assembled in America. Go to college, get a degree, right? All of these things over time have had tax encouragement, tax credits, or tax implications associated with them. And as time goes on, right, it's hard to take something away, right? If you already have it, they don't want to take it away. They just pile things on top. And that's why, as we look at understanding taxes, it is a very complicated mess, right? There's just a lot of stuff that's going on. Anybody that started from ground zero right now would never design anything like this, but over 100 years, this is kind of what we've ended up with. And so one of the really important things to know about this, right, is that because of this, everybody's taxes are different, right? Everybody is special. Your own individual circumstances are going to drive how much tax you owe, what your tax situation is. And so as we look at this, as you look at and help clients, right, everybody's going to be a little bit different, which is one of the things that I think makes it really fun is everyone's special. All right, a couple more. Let's talk about some more tax responsibility concepts. So the first one, right, is that taxes in the US work very differently than they do in many other countries, right? A lot of countries don't have income taxes. Other countries, it's only always just like taken out by your employer. You never have to file any forms. Not the way it is here. And here, one of the things is that taxes are based on a calendar year. So January 1st through December 31st, that is a tax year. So we're going to do all income, all expenses during that tax year. And each year is separate. So 2025 is one year. We're going to use 2025 rules. Then next year, 2026, we're going to report about income and expenses in 26. We'll use whatever the 2026 rules are for that year. It is also every person's individual responsibility to calculate and pay their own taxes. And filing your taxes is sending the forms into the government to tell them what you have calculated. So you often need to do this, even if you don't owe any taxes, even if you don't get any money back, you still have to tell them, hey, here's my numbers, there we go. And then finally, each taxpayer is ultimately responsible for the information on their returns. Right? Again, most taxpayers and tax preparers are honest, but there are a few bad actors out there. And so some of the rules that the IRS has put in place are trying to address those situations. We'll talk about all of the fun, naughty stuff that US citizens have done as we go through it. So the IRS takes kind of a trust but verify approach generally when you look at tax returns. So the IRS will initially take a taxpayer's word, right? That taxpayer was signing under penalties of perjury that it's true. So they're going to say, all right, you said it was true. And they will usually accept the return if you e-file it, or they will mail it off and process it, right? But just because it was accepted by the IRS doesn't mean that they really agree with it. That's more just like, yeah, okay, like the first glance, it looks good. They take the return, they do that very first set of checks, then they will do another set of checks. They'll actually process it. They'll double check, like, you said that you got this much in wages. Well, what did that employer say? And do those match? Things like that. After they process the return, they will send you the refund. That's kind of the first sign that they say, yep, we think you're right. But the IRS can and does ask for additional information. Sometimes, often this can be like 2 or 3 years later, right? Hey, yeah, we aren't so sure about that. Can you send us your receipt to show your $100 donation to, the whatever charity that you donated to? They also will ask for additional information sometimes before they even send you the money back, right? The IRS is very worried about tax fraud. They're worried that somebody filed a return and it wasn't you and they're taking your money. And so they want you to verify your identity. So we've seen quite a few taxpayers in that situation from this past year. It seems like the IRS is doing this more frequently, particularly with first-time filers. They say, before we send you, a check for $1,000, we want to make sure that you really are who you say you are. So they'll send a letter to the person. That person will have a phone number. They'll need to call up and provide some information to confirm, yes, it's really me. Yes, I sent that form in. Here, I can tell you the numbers on that form to verify it. The government also, right, they want your money, right? Citizens and permanent residents, they pay US tax on their worldwide income, right? So no matter where you are in the world, you get to pay US taxes. You also get to report your worldwide assets because might be a history of people hiding money in things like Swiss bank accounts, so they don't have to pay taxes on them. If you are not a citizen or a permanent resident, then different rules might apply, right? If you are here long enough, which we'll talk about, you're going to still pay taxes like a citizen or resident. So the IRS is going to still want all of your income from all around the world. They're going to want to know how much money you're hiding to make sure that you're paying tax on all of it. But if you're not a citizen or permanent resident and not been here long enough to become a tax resident, then you use a separate set of rules where you only pay US tax on US income. That is non-residents, and that is what we're going to focus on here today and over the next days. So let's talk about that tax residency. So the term the IRS uses is aliens. So an alien is basically somebody that isn't a citizen of the United States. A resident alien is somebody that is taxed basically the same as a US citizen, right? They're the people that have been here long enough. There's a few that can still get treaty benefits, but mostly they just pay taxes like anybody else. A non-resident alien is somebody that does not have a green card, right? They don't have permanent resident status, and they have not passed what's called the substantial presence test, or SPT. This is the residency test, and it determines kind of what is long enough. And it involves some math. You count the number of days that you're here in the United States for like this year and the year before and the year before that. And we'll do a little bit of that, but we're not going to have to do a lot of it. But we're going to do some of it later. But the other thing to know, right, is this test, this residency test, it doesn't always apply. Some people on some types of visas have a period of time where they're exempt from that residency test. And the people that we help are some of those. So the math for that substantial presence test. To meet this test, you have to be here in the US at least 31 days in 2025, and then 183 days for the past 3 years when you count all of 2025 days, a third of 2024, and a sixth of 2023. If you meet that test, then you're going to be a tax resident for the part of the year that you meet the test. So there are actually kind of 3 results from this test. You can be a non-resident, didn't meet that test at all. You can be a resident alien for the full year, right, the entire year. Or you can be this lovely kind of in-between thing called a dual status alien, where you're a non-resident for part of the year, and then you're a resident for part of the year. This test is used every year to determine your tax residency. So until you become a citizen, every year you would use this test to say, am I a tax resident? Do I have to pay taxes on everything? Or do I just have to pay taxes on the stuff that happens in the US? All right, the common visa types that we see at our tax clinics. So F visas are the vast majority of the folks we see. They are academic students, right? Degree-seeking students. M visas are vocational students, so there's not necessarily a degree. It could be a certificate or other program. J visas, so there are a lot of different types of J visas. Our most common ones are professors or scholars. We also see a lot of research assistants, right, postdocs. We see J1 students quite a lot as well. There can be teachers and trainees and other specialists, but those top ones are the ones that we really see a lot. There's also a Q visa, which is a cultural exchange as well. If you want to learn a little bit more about those visas, you can go to this website here, and it talks about kind of what are the criteria and what is that intention of that visa. And then to see entry and exit dates, because we have to count days, right? So we need to know like when we were here and when we were not. This I-94 page is where we do that. So that's where you could enter your name and your passport information, and then they'll provide whatever your entry and exit dates were based on that. All right, so I said this was the residency test, but some people don't have to use that test. Those people are exempt individuals. So exempt individuals don't count the days in the US towards that residency test. Now, one big thing we get is a lot of students will come in and say, oh, I'm exempt. I don't have to pay taxes. No, you're exempt from the residency test, but you still have to pay taxes on your US income. So that is one of the things that we will sometimes see from our students, is they've done enough research to be dangerous and think that they're exempt and they don't have to do it. So an exempt individual defined is a student on an F1 or J1, M1 or Q1 visa for the first 5 calendar years they're here in the US. So if it was a continuous visit, and I totally use my fingers all the time, right? 21, 2, 3, 4, 5. So first 5 years, you're going to be exempt. You don't count the days that you're here in the US on that visa. Now, one important thing to know, right? This is a lifetime visit exemption. So if they were here previously with a student visa, that counts, totally counts. And any part of a year counts, right? So even if they came in for just one day, like they came in on December 31st, 2024, that 2024 is that first year that counts towards their residency. The next kind of category is teachers and trainees on J1 or Q1 non-student visas. And this is a very confusing test, so I will endeavor to tell you the words and then we'll kind of walk through this graph so you can see how it works. So you will be an exempt individual in the current tax year if you were not previously exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of 2 of the preceding 6 calendar years, which is a big mouthful. So let's break that down. The preceding 6 calendar years are 2019 through 2024, right? So we would look back. One way to think about this is, right, is residency is determined every year and it kind of builds on each year. So start at the beginning, whenever that was, and move forward answering the residency question every year until you get to the current year. So if we look at Jane, for example, Jane is a teacher. J1, she is here in 2024 and 2025. So our prior 6 years, 2019 through 2024, she was here and she was exempt in one of those years. So she was not exempt in 2 or more years. So she is going to be exempt in 2025. Jill came the year before, right? She came in 2023. So she was exempt in 2023 and 2024. So she was already exempt in the prior 2 years. That means she is not going to be exempt in 2025. Joanne was here as a student back in the late teens, 2018, 2019, 2020. Then she went off, she worked, and now she's come back as a teacher, right? She came back in 2025. But she was here as a student in 2 of the preceding 6 years. So she is not going to be exempt. Julie has the almost identical situation, right? But she was just here earlier, right? She's only got 1 year where she was here in those past 6 years, back in 2019. So she will again be exempt in 2025 because only one of those 6 years applies to her. All right. I would strongly encourage you to bookmark this page or in the training or take a screenshot of it because this table can be very helpful, just kind of organizing it this way when you're trying to figure out tax residency for the J1 or J non-student people. All right. Once again, there is even more fun. Basically, there's like a further exception to the exemption rules. If you were exempt, but you can still, even if you meet that 2 out of 3, there are times when you might be able to still be exempt. Basically, that says those times are if a foreign employer paid all of your compensation during the current year, you were present as a teacher or trainee, so not a student, but a teacher or trainee in any of the prior years, and a foreign employer paid all of your compensation during all of those prior years. So basically, like, let's imagine you are a teacher at a university in Japan, and you came over for a semester and you taught, and then you left, and then you came back now, and you're still being paid by your university in Japan, even though you're doing research here, you could still potentially be exempt. So that's what that table is. It's not very common to have people that kind of fall into this criteria, but every now and then we do see somebody. But it's on a, 1 in 1,000 kind of a time frame. All right, a couple more things about exempt individuals. So somebody comes in, they have a primary visa, they're a -1, they're the student, they're the teacher, they're the researcher. They can bring their family members with them sometimes. So those come on -2 visas. So they're called dependent visas. Now, dependent visa is not the same thing as dependent for tax purposes. And just because the primary visa holder has a federal tax residency status, that family member may not have that same status. They're going to use the same rules. If they're a student, they're going to use that 5-year rule. If they're a teacher or a trainee, they're going to use the 2 out of 6 rule, but they may not have the same status. Once they get either before that period of exemption or after that period of exemption, they are going to be subject to the substantial presence test. They'll count the days that they're here. They meet that 183 days. They're going to be residents for that year. Okay. All right. There is a flow chart in one of our reference tools that has this, okay, how do you figure out if you're an exempt individual or not? This is a pretty useful way to look at it. A reminder now for this. So the form 8843 is one of the forms that we're going to talk about next week. And basically, if you're an exempt individual, you need to tell the IRS, hey, I am exempt. I'm not subject to this test. That form 8843 is how you do that. It basically says, here's my information. Here's the school or organization that I'm with. Here's the type of visa I have. Here's the days that I was here in the United States. I'm exempt from the residency test. That's basically what it is. So who is a resident alien, right? We said a green card holder is a resident alien. An F4J student can be a resident alien if they have been here for more than 5 years and they pass the substantial presence test. Same for a teacher or researcher, right? They've been here more than that 2 out of 6 and they pass the substantial presence test, right? So it's not enough just to no longer be exempt. If you're not exempt, now you have to use that test, count the number of days that you're here, and determine if you're a resident or not. Finally, there's one additional rule. So a resident or a non-resident or a dual status alien that's married to a resident, they can choose to be treated as a resident, right? The IRS doesn't mind that at all. They say, hey, tax on your worldwide income, report all your assets. We're cool with that. Sure. So if you want to, if a client wants to, and they're a non-resident, but they're married to a resident, they can choose to be treated as residents. And that does happen a decent amount at our tax clinics. All right, so I mentioned this special category of person, right? A dual status alien. So they're a resident for part of the year and they're a non-resident for part of the year. They have special filing requirements. Generally, this occurs when people come in and they pass the substantial presence test that first year. So usually that's like an H-1B visa. So it's not very common for our clients. It can be somebody that gets a permanent resident, a green card status during the year, or somebody after they were a resident and then they leave that final year. However, we do not have to worry about them. Dual status returns are very complicated and they are out of scope. So the IRS determines a lot of the scope things about what we can and can't help with. They said, remember, basic returns for low to moderate income individuals, This is a complicated return, no matter what kind of income you have. And so it is out of scope. So anybody that we find in this situation, we will refer them to some IRS resources and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but it's too complicated. All right. So let's do some examples. We're going to do this. So I am going to do those. And I would say if you're online, let's see here, do clapping if you think the answer is yes or is resident, and let's do resident is, yeah, clapping, and then non-resident is fireworks or something like that. And if you're here in the room, let's do, if you're a resident, you're up high. If you're a non-resident, you're kind of down low, you're not so sure. So Sam is an F1 student. He came here in June of 2022. Is he a resident or non-resident? So if you think he's a resident, do clapping and do a hand up high. If you think he's a non-resident, give me some fireworks. You can do a hand down low. I will give you the reminder that, right, for a student, right, you will be exempt if you are present for 5 years or less. So 22, 23, 24. All right, I don't really see any responses yet online, but I'm seeing some hands here in the room, which is great. He is a non-resident. That is exactly right. Right, 22, 3, 4 is his third year. So he's got 2 more years before he could become a resident based on how long he's been here. All right, Sam's wife came with him on an F2 visa, but she is not a student. Is she going to be a resident or is she going to be a non-resident? What do you guys think? Yes. Non-resident, that's exactly right. She uses the same rules that he does. Even though she's not a student, she's still here on an F2 visa, so she's going to use the same rules. All right, Juanita is a teacher. She came here to start teaching on the beginning of the spring semester. She came on December 30th, 2023. She's been here ever since then. What do we think? Is she going to be a resident? Raise your hand high. Or non-resident, raise your hand low. Yes, that's right. She's going to be a resident. Yeah, because even though it was like 2 days in 2023, like that counts. So she would have been exempt in 2023 and 2024. So now in 2025, she's not exempt. She's going to count her days that she's been here, and then she's going to pass the substantial presence test, and she'll file as a resident. All right. Joan is here in the US on an F1 visa. She got married to Bob, who got his green card. If they choose to file a joint return, is Joan going to be a resident? Raise your hand high, non-resident, low, or part-year resident. Go kind of sideways. Yes. Yep, she's going to be a resident. That's exactly right. So number one, there is nothing in the federal tax terminology for part-year residents. You can be a dual status alien, which is sort of what the equivalent is, but there is nothing in federal tax for part-year residents. We will hit some state part-year residents, but nothing for federal. And yes, she can choose to file a joint return. She will be treated as a resident for the entire year. So she'll get all of the great credits and deductions that are available to residents, but she will pay tax on her worldwide income and tell all about any bank accounts she has in her home country. All right. Let's do one more. So this is Marie. She is here. She actually came to the US back in 2010 as an F2 student because her dad was here working on his doctorate degree. They stayed here until 2012, and then they went back home. And now she came back. She's on a J1 student visa. She got here in 2023, and she's been here the entire time. So for 2025, is she going to be a resident or a non-resident? Hand high, clapping for resident, down low, fireworks for non-residents. All right, let's count. So 5 years, 10, 11, 12, right? Those 3 years count. 23, 24. So those are her 5 years of exemption. So 2025, she is no longer exempt. She's going to count her days. She was here the entire time, so she is going to be a resident for tax purposes. All right. Okay. We will practice more on this, right? Because this is kind of the fundamental first building block for all of our international student clients, because a lot of them are non-residents, but some of them are residents. Some of them came here when they were kids. Some of them are doing a PhD and they were here as undergrads. Some of them have just changed their major and been here a while. So we do see all of it. And so knowing what somebody's tax residency status is kind of like the first step for doing their taxes. We're going to skip that one. We're going to skip all of these. Let's do this one. I like this one. All right. So Feng came to a tax center. He needs help. He is here on a J1. He came here in 2023 to teach, and he brought his wife and child. So they both have J2s. The university hired his wife this year, who got employment authorization, and now she is starting teaching here in 2025. So what do we think? Is Feng a non-resident alien? Raise your hand up high if you think he's a non-resident. Give me a clap online if you think he is. So he is here as a teacher. He came in 2023. So 23, 24, those are his 2 years. So now in 2025, he's going to count his days and he will be a resident for tax purposes. All right? Because so there are 2 sets of rules. Students get 1 set of rules for exemption. Teachers, trainees, they have a second set of rules. Now let's talk about his wife. She came here in 2023 as well, but she just started teaching here in 2025. So do we think she is a resident, or do we think she's a resident? Raise your hand high. Non-resident, raise your hand low. What do you think? Yep. She's a resident as well, right? The fact that she's teaching has nothing to do with it, right? The income that somebody has nothing to do with their tax residency status. Whether they're working, whether they're not, scholarships or not, that has nothing to do with it. That tells us like which set of rules we use for taxing that income, but just the fact that they're doing something or getting some income has nothing to do with what their tax residency status is. All right, we're gonna skip Felix and we're gonna stop for questions. So does anybody have any questions about this? Yes. Sure. It's okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. So we said, if you are a citizen, you are automatically a resident. If you have a green card, you are a resident. If you don't have a green card or citizenship, then we have to use a test called the substantial presence test to figure out if you are a resident or not. And that test counts the number of days that you're here in the US. There's some math. If you meet that test, you're a resident. If you don't meet that test, you're a non-resident. Mercedes, I see your hand raised. I'll come back to you in just a minute here, okay? All right. Some people don't have to use that test. They're exempt from that residency test. A student on an FJ MRQ visa in the first 5 calendar years they're present in the US will be exempt from that test. So if somebody came in for the first time, they joined the university in the fall of 2021, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're still exempt in 2025, but starting in 2026, they've used that period of exemption up, and now they're gonna have to start counting their days. And for the rest of their life, for whatever visits they have, they're not gonna be exempt under that rule, they're gonna always count those days. Now, a teacher, or, oh, yes.
Exempt meaning that they will be considered a resident?
Exempt meaning that the days they were here on their visa don't count towards residency. So from a practical perspective, generally, yes, right? It's almost always that you're gonna be, if you're exempt from the residency test, you're not gonna be a resident. Could I try to come up with some sort of scenario where you did become one? Yes, I probably could, but most commonly, if you're exempt, yes, you'll be a non-resident, but it's not like a guarantee. not derived from it. All right, so a teacher or trainee, they are going to be exempt only if they were not previously exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of 2 of the preceding 6 calendar years. So this is where the table is really helpful because you can say, okay, what are those 6 preceding years, 2019 through 2024? Was I exempt in any of those? How many, if so? Then you can find out, am I going to be exempt in this year? Does that help? Okay. All right. Okay. We have a couple of questions online. So let's try to go. All right. So Mercedes, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, so does the substantial presence test take into consideration time spent in the US other than those visa categories? So the FJMQ, let's say if someone was here on maybe a B1, B2, would that count or not?
Yes, absolutely. So all days in the United States for somebody that is not a citizen or permanent resident are considered in the substantial presence test. The days that you're here as an F or a J visa, if you're exempt, those are not counted, but all other visa types, well, almost all other visa types are counted. So like a B1, B2, tourist visa, TN, ESTA, visa waiver, all of those things all count. There are a couple more visa types where you are automatically exempt, like indefinitely. Those are things like diplomatic visas. So like A visas, NATO visas, things like that. Those are not commonly seen at our tax clinics, but there are kind of one more subset of people, and they're never going to be US residents for tax purposes, right? This is like the ambassador from Spain that's here in the US. Sure, he's here all the time, but he doesn't have to pay taxes in the US like a US person does. All right, Jason, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. So basically, for example, if an F1 student have been here for like more than 5 years, um, would that person going to be like a resident in terms of tax? Like even though it's not really that continuous.
Yeah, so it's going to really depend on like the number of days they were here and like which days they were here, but probably they're going to be a resident. But we'd have to do the math to see like how many days they were here and did they meet that test. So
Okay. So for example, I have been here for like I'm a F1. I have been here like for almost 10 years, and there's like some breaks when I get back to my home country, and I wonder if I'm a resident in terms of tax or not.
sure. So, generally, if those breaks are relatively short, a few months, something like that, then yes, you're going to be a resident for tax purposes in the US. If you had extended breaks, so like 6 months, 9 months, maybe gone for like a whole year kind of over a couple of calendar years, then it's possible that maybe your residency lapsed during that kind of a break. But generally, if you're here most of the time for, multiple years continuously, you're going to be a resident. So if you think about like that 183 days, right, that's 6 months. And so you say, okay, well, a third of the prior year and a sixth of the year before. So that could be like, if I was here the entire year, that would be 2 months, 60 days if I'm doing a sixth, right? And then a third of the prior year from that, a third of the days is 120. So, I can make being a resident of the current year, if I was here the 2 prior years, with like a month of time here in the US to meet that 183-day limit. So if you're here most of the time, it adds up and you're going to be a resident. And if you're just gone for like a temporary visit, like you go home, if you were a resident before for the current year and you're a resident afterwards, you're gone for like a temporary visit, like over Christmas or something, then you're going to be a resident kind of through that temporary absence. If you're not, then that change of residency can result in a dual status alien situation sometimes, which we do see. That's kind of the one place where we see that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. We're going to jump through these. Okay, so that is the end of our non-resident training for today. You guys made it through the first one. Well done. So I'm going to just talk a couple minutes about Moodle and homework. Then we're going to break for 5 or 10 minutes. We're going to probably reconvene at 7 o'clock is what we'll do. So I'll try to be quick and give us a nice break. All right. So this is the link for Moodle. Everybody, I haven't sent out the invitations yet. I will send those out probably tomorrow morning at this point. So let's talk about this. Why are we doing this, right? You already have all these IRS tests. Why do you do all this extra stuff, right? So if we think about it, remember our goals, right? We're here to help people do taxes, right? We want to make sure we prepare you, our volunteers, so that you can help our clients prepare taxes correctly, which means that you need to prepare accurate and correct tax returns also, right? So our online course has a couple of purposes. Number one, it's just a repository of information, right? All of the links to the videos that we record here, those are all going to be out there. All of the IRS references, whatever references we develop, all that stuff is going to live out there. So you've got like a one easy stop to go find it. The other part, right, is that to be as successful as a volunteer, right, you really need more practice than what we can do here in our training sessions, right? Unless we were to start the tax volunteering training, like, make it a full tax clinic class where you start in September, right? They really just can't cover it all in the period. So we're going to cover the material here, and then you're going to practice outside of the classes. So participation is required, right? You guys got to do this. It's really important. I will tell you that the people that do the work, that do the quizzes, they do the practice returns, they pass the IRS test with like a 98% success rate. People that don't and like try to like jump over and skip it, they're more like the 30 to 40% pass rate, right? You can still do it, but it's a lot harder because you're just not up to speed. You haven't practiced. The training material that we have has been developed over the course of a lot of years of taking the IRS test. So we're going to hit all of the things that are really important to them. We're also going to hit a lot of the things or all of the things that are really important to help you be successful when you're talking with our customers. One thing to know, right, we're also going to use this to collect our IRS paperwork. We also use groups within the course just to help customize the volunteer experience. So when we talk about that, we'll talk about things like who's doing returns for Maryland. It's going to be our volunteers at Maryland and Goucher College, things like that. If you have passed the course in previous years, you can access a return volunteer path where you get to skip some things. How much practice and how much you've done kind of determines how much of it you really get to skip. But yeah. This is that same course again, right? So everybody's going to do, well, everybody, year one, everybody's going to do everything. But the fall course modules, those are really the easiest ones. Those are the basic fundamentals. You get a lot of practice in those your first year. So that's the first bit that you get to skip if you're a returning volunteer. And we're really in the fall, we're really gearing up to help you pass those IRS tests. And then when we get started in the spring, we're going to really start to dive into tax software, and we're going to dive into state taxation and special circumstances that our clients typically see. All right. For all of our materials online in the Moodle course, generally you're going to get 2 attempts at the quizzes and assignments, 80% a pass. So I'm kind of following the IRS procedure there. You have to try everything. There's no penalty if you fail, right? If you try the 2 times and you don't make it through, that's, you just need to study that or review that a little bit more before you take the IRS test. But these are really intended to give you the support and give you the practice that you need to be successful. So there are a couple of things though that you do have to pass. You have to pass the volunteer agreement assignment, right? We have to collect that volunteer agreement from everybody and their ID. You don't have to submit your ID online. We can do a Zoom meeting or you can show me in person. but I've got to see that ID and match it with your volunteer agreement. And then you've got to pass that volunteer readiness check. And here we have a slightly higher level. We say 90% to pass. There's a quiz. It's going to cover spring and fall materials. You get 3 tries. You get new questions every time. But it's, again, same materials, just more new questions. And then you're going to have 2 practice scenarios that you have to prepare. And our goal is to be complete by our first tax clinic, which I think is 2/17 or 2/18, I can't remember now. And then the final deadline, the training is done on February 28th. So at that point, the tax clinics are in full speed and we're done with training and we're on to helping people. If you don't pass, there are a couple of other options that we can talk about, and we would love to have you next year. But that is not, well, if you go through the process, generally you'll make it through without any difficulties. So when you aren't able to kind of keep up with things, that it becomes a problem. Speaking of which, right, you don't have to do everything this week, right? I'm not going to look at this next week and say, oh no, I'm so sorry, Kenneth, you did not pass because you haven't done your, am I a non-resident alien quiz yet? But I will say, right, is each session is sequential, right? Session 2 is going to build on session 1. Session 3 is going to build on session 2. So if you don't do anything, right, it's going to become very difficult because you're going to have this big, huge pile of work that you need to try to get through before you pass the test. So stick with it, do it during the week. It'll make your life a lot easier. Oop, and I don't know what I just did there. There we go. All right, with that, any final questions? So if you are wanting to stick around for the resident, you can just stay here. We're going to take a break and we're going to resume at 7 o'clock. If you want to leave for a remote, you can head out. That's no worries. If you aren't signed up as a volunteer yet, please make sure you email me. You should have all of the invitations if you're signed up. If you're here and you're leaving in person and you're leaving, please just turn in your name tents here at the front. Totally fine. And we will rejoin momentarily. Stop the training. Stop the recording. Yeah.